Welcome, Christine, to CCBH Chats. And today our topic is self-compassion. So thank you. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome, Christine.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
When we talk about self-compassion, what we're talking about is the practice of being warm and understanding towards ourselves when we suffer, fail, or feel inadequate. So self-compassion is about the practice of goodwill, not necessarily good feelings, where you mindfully accept that the moment is painful and embrace yourself with kindness and care, remembering that imperfection is part of the shared human experience. I think it's kind of important to differentiate self-compassion from self-esteem. So when we talk about self-esteem, we're kind of encouraging this positive evaluation of the self, particularly for our achievements. And that's definitely important. We want people to have healthy self-esteem and acknowledge their personal victories and successes. But with self-compassion, it's more of a form of acceptance in the face of failure. Having self-compassion means being able to relate to yourself in a way that's forgiving, accepting, loving, even when situations might be less than optimal.
Can you give me an example of what it means to be compassionate to yourself? Like, let's say that I was in a car accident. Maybe I was the one that caused the car accident. And can you give us example how I would show self-compassion in that instance?
So it would kind of depend on what your negative thoughts are related to that experience. Sometimes it might be you're excessively blaming yourself. I should have done something better. I didn't do this right. But maybe in that moment, you really were doing the best you could. You made the best decision you could with the information you had. Like when it came to if you were switching lanes or something and you looked and you didn't see somebody, but somebody was there. So sometimes it's just about acknowledging that maybe I did make a mistake and it didn't work out the way I wanted to. But in the moment, I was doing the best I could. Sometimes it's about forgiving yourself and saying, I made a mistake and now I need to learn from this and move forward and figure out what I need to do so this doesn't happen again. Just because something bad happens doesn't mean you're the worst person ever. So self-compassion is about acknowledging that we all make mistakes. We all experience failures. But that doesn't mean we're horrible people necessarily. You know, it's about forgiving yourself and learning to move forward. And like I said, kind of learn from our mistakes and failures.
Yeah. So we live in a world today which is extremely critical. Not that we want always critical, but we see it so much more now because all the social media platforms and all the access that people have to you all the time. So do you think it's more, are you think we're programmed to self-judge more likely than to show self-compassion?
So I don't like to say that we're programmed to self-judge, but I will say that our brain is a problem solver. So it tends to not notice things when they're neutral. For example, if you're sitting in a room and the temperature is comfortable, you're probably not going to give it another thought. But if you're sitting in a room and the temperature is too hot or too cold, you're going to start thinking about ways you can be more comfortable. So whether that means you have to put on a jacket, take off a jacket, adjust a thermostat, turn on a fan, something to kind of solve this problem. And once you do that and you're sitting comfortable in the room, again, you're not going to give the temperature another thought. Your brain's going to move on to the next thing that needs its attention. And another piece of this is, like you mentioned, we get a lot of influences from outside sources. We can start to develop just a habit of self-judging. So if you get feedback from like your culture, your family, your friends, your teachers, your bosses, social media, everywhere we look, we're getting information about how we should feel, how we should show our emotions, what we should do, what it means to be successful. And we can start to base our feelings of worth around our performances and mistakes. And when we don't live up to those expectations, we then start to criticize ourselves and think that we need to prove ourselves through our achievements. And over time, these critical responses to negative emotions and experiences become like a reflex, something we do automatically.
So, what do you think happens when we critically judge ourselves over and over and over again, which commonly occurs a lot, whether it's we say it in our head and it's a negative loop, or we're watching things that reinforce that critical judging of ourselves?
Yeah. So when you're already having a negative experience, you're going to be feeling emotions such as pain, shame, embarrassment, guilt. And when we critically judge ourselves, this is just going to increase those negative feelings. And as we continue to critically judge ourselves in response to mistakes and failures, we start to think that others might be judging us as well. We assume that others must be thinking of us critically because that is how we're thinking of ourselves. So we're just increasing, those negative experiences we're having. And then sometimes you can start to assume that other people are judging us as well, making us feel even worse. Over time, critically judging ourselves can lead to the development of what's called a cognitive distortion, which is basically just an automatic negative thought that filters how we see things. So if you think of a pair of sunglasses, they have these tinted lenses which filter out the sunlight, altering the world that we see. Cognitive distortions are kind of like that, the lens. They filter out the positive aspects of our experiences so that we see things more negatively than they already are.
Yeah. I think the challenge for me is that if you have lived in that environment for so long with the self-judging or very critical of yourself, how do you even develop the core elements of self-compassion? How do you do that? How
Well,
does
first,
it happen?
I think it would be helpful to identify what some of the core elements are.
Okay.
So Kristen Neff is a psychologist, and she's considered one of the first people to really define self-compassion in a way that we could research it. And she's done a lot of research in this area. And she kind of identified 3 core elements to self-compassion. The first is practicing self-kindness instead of self-judgment. So this involves refraining from harsh criticism of the self and treating yourself like you would a friend. The goal is to be able to show kindness and understanding towards ourselves when we fail at something or when we hurt. Self-kindness means treating our worth as unconditional, even when we fall short of our expectations. The second component is accepting that we have a common humanity, instead of kind of isolating and seeing our mistakes and failures as unique experiences. What that means is being able to accept the fact that all people are imperfect and all people experience pain. The goal here is to appreciate that others feel the same way at times and be able to understand that your shortcomings are a natural part of the human experience. And then the third and final component would be to practice mindfulness instead of over-identifying or focusing on the negative experiences. What we're talking about here is being able to maintain a non-biased awareness of experiences, even those that are painful. When we practice mindfulness, we're practicing observing without judgment our thoughts and feelings as they are, without trying to suppress or deny them. And the reason this is important is because we cannot ignore our pain and feel compassion for it at the same time. So if we're ignoring it and pushing it to the side, you can't show kindness and be gentle with yourself for that experience. But on the other hand, we don't want to over-identify with our thoughts and feelings, because that can lead to being only focused on the negative aspects or being overwhelmed by these experiences. So practicing mindfulness is a way to kind of find the balance between ignoring it and over-identifying with the experience.
Can you give us an example of what you could do on a daily basis that actually exhibits mindfulness, like for yourself? What could you do like on a daily basis when you get up, you start your day, and really being conscientious about what mindfulness is? Can you give us an example of what that would look like, Christine?
So sure, there's a couple different things you can do to practice mindfulness in general.
Okay.
One example would just be deep breathing. So you can just kind of sit with yourself for a moment and take a few deep breaths and just kind of be aware of your body as you take the breath in and as you exhale. Notice what you feel, any sensations. You can kind of count the inhale and then count on the exhale, but just sitting and experiencing the breath.
Yeah.
You can do guided meditations. So there's a lot of different ways you can do that. One example is to imagine yourself sitting on a stream and just sit with your thoughts without judgment, letting them pass you by, imagining that your thoughts are like fish swimming in the stream, one way or the other. No good, no bad. They just are. Sometimes they'll pass by quickly. Sometimes they might linger for a little while, but that's okay. You're just sitting with your thoughts without judgment. You can also practice like a body scan. So this is a way to just kind of get in touch with what you're experiencing. Some people start from the top up. Some it's you start with your feet and you scan up to your head, whichever's more comfortable. But just kind of slowly scan through each part of your body, noticing any sensations, tightness, tension, relaxation. Without judgment, just notice what you feel as you scan through each section of your body.
Okay. So a lot of it is kind of being grounded and grounding yourself. Just really
It's about being in the moment without
Mhm.
judgment, allowing yourself to experience whatever comes.
Yeah. So what would you say would, between your personal and your professional life, would be different if you move more towards compassion with yourself? What do you think would be different?
So, research has shown that people who score higher on measures of self compassion are better able to accept their failures without defensiveness or justification, and they're better able to recognize that all people are deserving of love and acceptance. And this kind of fosters a growth mindset, whereby we're able to learn from our mistakes and failures and identify what went right, what went wrong, and what we can try to do differently to have a better outcome. Research has also shown that practicing self compassion can contribute to having decreased anxiety, decreased
Mhm.
feelings of insecurity, and it contributes to having increased motivation and improved mood. So when someone is feeling less anxious, more confident, more motivated, and happier, you're going to start to notice improvements in your personal and professional life. You're going to start to be able to have healthier relationships with other people. You're going to be able to better perform the responsibilities that you have to on a daily basis.
So what are some of the tips you would give for people to build self-compassion on a daily basis, weekly, kind of like if they're on the journey to try to create a more compassion towards the self? What are some of the tips you would share with our audience?
Sure. So, first, a couple tips that I kind of share with everybody whenever you're trying to make a change in thought processes or behaviors, these are just a couple things that can kind of help with that. And the first is acknowledging that change is hard. It's going to take practice, time, and effort to learn new ways of thinking and behaving. Some of these tips I'm going to give you might sound really easy. It's like the mindfulness example. It might sound really easy to just sit with your breath, but if you're somebody who's not used to that, you might experience some racing thoughts. You might experience a lot of distractibility, and that's okay. Just keep coming back to it and practicing it, putting that
Mhm.
effort in, you'll get better at it. So that's the first thing. The second is try to set an intention daily of what you want to work on. Figure out what the goal for that day should be to kind of keep yourself, again, mindful of what change you're trying to make. And then start with one small change. If you try to do everything all at once, it can get really overwhelming.
Mhm.
And so I like to set people up for success, not failure. Pick one step, really work on mastering that skill. And when you feel you've got that down, figure out what the next step will be that kind of supports your growth.
Mm.
So specific to self-compassion, a couple things you can try to start doing. One is start by giving yourself permission to be human and let yourself make mistakes. Take away that need to be perfect in every aspect and acknowledge that it's okay if everything doesn't go right. Again, like I said, personal victories and successes are important and are great, but you really learn more from your mistakes and failures than you learn from those successes. You
It's
were
true.
successful at it because you've already mastered whatever it was.
It's true. It's true.
Yeah, taking these
Mhm.
opportunities to make mistakes and learn from them and grow into a better person. Treating yourself like you would a friend, say you imagine yourself in a situation, take somebody you care about and imagine they're in that situation and think about what you would tell them, and then take your own advice. Sometimes it can be easier to come up with what those suggestions would be and what that kind response would
Mhm.
be if you target it to somebody else when you're first learning this.
So, if there was one thing that you would want to share with everyone that be listening, what would be the one thing you would like to share today about self-compassion?
So I think if anybody really wants to start learning about self-compassion, a good place to start would be Kristen Neff's website. She's the one I mentioned before who's done a lot of research in this area. And her website is self-compassion.org. And she's got a lot of great resources and
Mhm.
information out there to kind of help people get started in learning more about how to embrace and practice self-compassion.
Okay. Well, once again, thank you so much for joining us today, Christine, and giving us and sharing light on self-compassion and giving us a resource that we can contact as well.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, and we hope that you'll come back again.
Oh,
Thank
if you'll
you.
have me.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.